welcome to Talk Treatises.
It's really a pleasure to be here.
So this is the show where we stop skimming the headlines and start reading the footnotes. We take the heavy, dust-covered volumes off the shelf.
The ones that usually serve as very dignified doorstops.
Exactly, the doorstop. And we crack them open. We do a deep dive into the text, the context, and the arguments of great works of philosophy and literature to figure out what exactly they were trying to tell us.
Right. We aren't just summarizing here. We are excavating. We're looking for the pulse that still beats in these old pages.
And today we're looking at a pulse that beats with a very specific, a very intense kind of anger. We are doing a deep dive into Hopes and Fears for Art by William Morris.
Yes.
Now, I have to be honest, when I hear the name William Morris, my brain immediately goes to one place.
I'm going to guess wallpaper.
Wallpaper. Beautiful, swirling, floral wallpaper. Heavy tapestries, the kind of stuff you see in a very fancy, slightly dark bed and breakfast.
Yeah, the quintessential arts and crafts aesthetic.
But we are not here to talk about interior design trends of the 1880s. Or at least not just that. We're here to talk about a man who looked at the Victorian world.
The absolute peak of the British Empire, mind you.
Right, the peak. And he basically said, this is all garbage. Burn it down.
That is barely an exaggeration. Morris is such a fascinating figure because he contains multitudes. I mean, he is a master craftsman, a poet, a highly successful businessman, but also a radical social agitator. Mm-hmm. And this book, Hopes and Fears for Art, it isn't a textbook on how to draw leaves. It's actually a collection of 5 lectures he delivered in the late 1870s and early 1880s. It's essentially a manifesto.
So let's set the scene for you listening before we get into the heavy arguments. We are in late 19th century England. The Victorian era.
Right. This is the height of the Industrial Revolution. Morris refers to it throughout the text as the century of commerce.
Which sounds very grand.
Well, if you're an economist at the time, it was the golden age.
Yeah.
England was the workshop of the world. GDP is exploding. Technology is advancing rapidly. Railways are everywhere.
So on paper, everything looks great. Line goes up.
Exactly. Line goes up. But Morris isn't looking at the ledger. He's looking out the window. And what he sees is, to use his exact words, plenteous knowledge and meager performance.
Plenteous knowledge and meager performance. Wow.
He sees a world of factories belching black smoke. He describes rivers running with black dye. He talks about the squalor of London and what he famously calls the Cockney nightmare of the suburbs just spreading out like a rash.
The Cockney nightmare. That is such a vivid image. It sounds like a bad punk band, but for him, it was a literal hellscape.
It was. He sees a civilization that has completely conquered nature. We've mastered steam, we've mastered chemistry.
But in the process, the text argues, we have enslaved ourselves to ugliness.
Precisely. He describes a world where the hurry of life has destroyed the beauty of life.
And that is the intellectual problem we're tackling today. It's the central tension of the whole book. We are richer than ever, we have more stuff than ever, but is any of it worth making?
And is any of it worth owning? He's asking if the ultimate price of our so-called progress is the death of art itself.
So let's get into his diagnosis. He thinks the problem started with a breakup, a really, really bad breakup.
The Great Divorce. Morris argues that we've created a catastrophic separation between what he calls the greater arts and the lesser arts.
Okay, let's unpack that for a second. Greater and lesser, what goes in which bucket?
Well, the greater arts are what we typically think of as high art. So architecture, sculpture, painting, the intellectual arts, the kind of stuff you see in a museum or a palace or a high-end gallery.
The stuff rich people buy to show they're cultured.
Exactly. And the lesser arts are literally everything else. The arts of the house builder, the joiner, the carpenter, the smith, the potter, the weaver, the things you use every single day.
So the mug I'm drinking my coffee from, the chair I'm sitting in right now, the rug under my feet.
Correct. And Morris's argument, and this is really the thesis statement of the entire work, is that art is not a luxury for the rich to go look at in a gallery on a Sunday. Real art is, and I want to quote this because it's the absolute core of his philosophy, art is the expression of man's pleasure in labor.
The expression of man's pleasure in labor, that is a beautiful line.
It changes everything about how you view the world. He believes that real art must be made by the people and for the people as a happiness to the maker and the user.
So if the person making the table wasn't happy making it,
the table is not art, it's just toil.
That is a wildly high bar. I mean, if we applied that rule today, if you look around your room right now, I'm looking at my laptop, my phone, this microphone. I don't think the people on the assembly line were expressing their pleasure.
And Morris would say, then those objects are immoral.
Wow. Okay, so let's go back to this great divorce of the arts. Why is it such a massive problem that painting and sculpture got separated from carpentry and pottery? Why can't we just have the genius painter doing his thing over here and the carpenter doing his thing over there?
Morris uses a very powerful analogy in the text to explain why this is a disaster. He compares the isolated high artist, the genius painter we just mentioned, to a captain of a company of soldiers.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Yeah. So the captain is leading an attack on a redoubt, a fortification.
Right.
He runs forward, full of energy and hope, sprinting toward the enemy lines to capture the fortress of beauty. He is heroic. He is talented. But he forgets to look back. He runs ahead, but his company, the soldiers, the common craftsmen, are not following him. They're stuck in the mud. They don't understand the plan. They are sullen prisoners, as Morris puts it, in the redoubt of unhappiness and brutality.
So the captain is out there completely alone.
Precisely. Morris argues that when the greater arts separate themselves from daily life, they become trivial. They become ingenious toys for a few rich and idle men.
Because they're disconnected from the daily life of the people.
Yes. They lose their power. But the fate of the soldiers, the craftsmen, is so much worse.
Because without the captain to lead them.
Without the connection to art, the lesser arts, those daily objects, become dull, mechanical, and ugly. They become unintelligent.
So you end up with a society where the rich have these hyper-refined paintings on their walls, but they sit on ugly furniture, eat off ugly plates, and look out the window at an ugly street.
It's a tragedy of separation. The genius becomes a toy, and the craftsman becomes a machine.
And Morris argues this wasn't always the case, right? He's constantly looking back to history in these lectures, specifically the Middle Ages and the Gothic era.
He is. Now, I know we often think of the Middle Ages as dark, dirty, plague-ridden.
Yeah, not exactly a utopia.
And Morris knows that life was hard. He's not naive about the lack of plumbing or the harsh winters, but he idealizes the condition of the worker. He talks about the mason of Broadway Village.
Who is the mason of Broadway Village? Is that a real guy?
It's more of an archetype he uses. Morris argues that in the past, a local mason didn't need a London architect to send him blueprints and tell him how to build a beautiful house. He just built it.
Yeah.
It came naturally to him.
Because the tradition of art was deeply embedded in the people.
Right. It wasn't something you went to university for. It was something you lived and breathed. He argues that in the past, all things made by man were in some way beautiful. Even a rough peasant's hut had a homeliness and a texture that was in complete harmony with nature.
Whereas now, he says, almost everything made by man is aggressively ugly unless we pay an absolute fortune for it to be otherwise.
It's a compelling point. I mean, you look at a medieval cathedral, and even the gargoyles, those little grotesque faces tucked away in corners up near the roof where almost nobody sees them.
Yeah, they have so much personality.
Exactly. Morris loves the gargoyles. He believes that those carvings are direct evidence that the workman was having fun. He wasn't just following a corporate standard operating procedure. He was expressing himself. He was allowed to be an artist while he was being a mason.
Which brings us perfectly to part 2 of our analysis, the philosophy of labor. Because for Morris, you really can't talk about art without talking about work.
They are exactly the same thing in his mind. Morris draws a very hard, thick line between work and toil.
And I think for most of us listening, those are just synonyms. You know, I'm going to work, I'm going to toil, same thing.
For Morris, they are complete opposites. He actually categorizes labor into 3 distinct kinds in the text.
Okay, let's run through them. What's the first one?
First, you have mechanical toil. This is the enemy. This is work that is machine-like. It is completely mindless. It's repetitive. It is done only for money or fear of starvation. Morris calls this a curse. He explicitly says it is degrading labor.
So this is the factory worker turning a crank for 12 hours a day. Or, you know, to modernize it, maybe the person entering data into a spreadsheet for 8 hours without even knowing what the numbers mean.
Correct. It strips the humanity out of the human. It makes them a cog.
Okay, so that's mechanical toil. What's the second?
Then you have intelligent work. This is better. It's done with care. It leaves signs of the worker's individuality. The worker actually has some level of control over what they are doing.
Like a carpenter who cares about the joint he's making, or a coder who takes pride in writing really clean, elegant code.
Yes, exactly. And finally, the highest form is imaginative work. This is what Morris calls the blossom of civilization. This is work that elevates the workman. It's when the creation involves invention, beauty, and storytelling.
And Morris thinks everyone should have access to imaginative work. That seems, who's going to dig the ditches?
Well, he thinks that a civilization that denies this kind of work to the masses is a sham civilization. He actually critiques a speech by a contemporary leader of thought. He doesn't name the guy, but he goes after him hard, who claimed that men only work to earn leisure.
That sounds pretty standard today. Work hard, play hard, I work to support my weekend.
Right. But to Morris, that is a massive confession of failure. He argues that if the only reason you work is to stop working, then your civilization has basically made work a torment. He says this view implies that all the work of the world is done against the grain.
That is a profound shift in perspective. He's not saying we need shorter hours so we can escape work. He's saying we need different work so we don't want to escape it.
Exactly. His ultimate goal is to abolish degrading labor. He defines this as making useless luxuries or merely shifting commercial counters around. He wants a world where every single worker finds actual happiness in the act of creating.
But this puts him on a massive collision course with the way his own society and really ours is structured. Because if we stop making useless luxuries, the economy just crashes, doesn't it?
And that leads us directly to part 3, the attack on luxury and sham art. Morris is absolutely vicious on this topic. He defines luxury not as comfort, but as slavery.
Slavery. That is a heavy, heavy word to use for a velvet sofa.
He calls luxury heaps of possessions which are sheer vexations. He argues that luxury requires a residuum, a permanent underclass of degraded laborers to produce it.
Oh, I see.
You cannot have the shiny, useless baubles of the rich without the miserable toil of the poor.
So when he walks into a wealthy Victorian drawing room, he doesn't see class or refinement. He sees a crime scene.
He sees sham art. He talks extensively about the clutter of the Victorian home, the heavy upholstery, the endless knickknacks, the thick curtains blocking out the sun. He says it's all fake. It's upholstery, not art.
And this gives us the most famous quote from the book. I think a lot of you listening might have actually heard this one on a Pinterest board or a minimalist blog, even if you didn't know it was William Morris.
Yes. Have nothing in your houses that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful.
Have nothing in your houses that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. It is the ultimate decluttering mantra. Long before Marie Kondo, there was William Morris telling you to throw all your stuff away.
Well, he actually suggests bonfires.
Wait, literal bonfires?
Yes. He says he has never been in a rich man's house that wouldn't look vastly better after a bonfire of 90% of its contents.
Burn 90% of your stuff. That is so aggressive.
But notice the strict criteria: useful or beautiful. Morris argues that most things in a modern house are neither of those things. They are just makeshifts or pretense. We buy them because we think we're supposed to, or to show off to our neighbors, but they don't serve a real function, and they aren't genuinely beautiful.
He talks about simplicity being the foundation of refinement, right?
Yes. He says simplicity of life begets simplicity of taste. If you strip away the luxury and the sham art, you are left with the absolute essentials. And if you only have a few things, a table, a chair, a bed, a cup, you can afford to make sure those few things are excellent.
It's quality over quantity on a societal scale. Instead of 50 cheap, ugly things that break in a year, have 5 beautiful, handmade things that last a lifetime.
And this philosophy doesn't stop at the front door. He pushes it outwards. It extends to the street, the city, and the earth itself. Which brings us to part 4, environmental aesthetics.
This part really surprised me when reading the text. He sounds like a modern environmentalist, but he's writing this in 1880.
He very much is. He argues forcefully that the surface of the earth is the property of all mankind. No individual has the right to ruin a landscape just to make a quick profit.
This is where he brings up that Cockney nightmare again, the spreading suburbs.
He hates the sprawl. He hates the century of smoke. He actually mocks the scientific community of his time. He says, essentially, you have the brilliant science to build massive guns and manufacture heavy black silks. But you can't teach Manchester to consume its own smoke. You can't teach Leeds how to clean the toxic black dye out of its river.
So he sees pollution not as an inevitable byproduct of progress, but as a sign of stupidity.
Stupidity and extreme greed. He says it's nobody's business to fix it because the counting house, the banks, and the financiers run everything. If clean air doesn't turn a profit, we don't get clean air.
He also has some very specific beefs with gardening, which I found hilarious. He goes after the florists.
Oh, he absolutely loathes the Victorian florist.
What did the florist ever do to him?
He hates the way gardeners were modifying flowers to make them showy rather than naturally beautiful. He talks at length about the cabbage rose.
Cabbage rose.
Yes, these big, pumped up, overly bright flowers that literally look like cabbages. They were specially bred to be huge and colorful, but in the process, they lost their natural scent and their delicacy. Morris calls them strong and bad, like a conqueror.
He is literally psychoanalyzing a flower.
He's analyzing the human intent behind the flower. The flower was modified to be loud and impressive, just like the sham art furniture in the drawing rooms. He also hates carpet bedding.
What is carpet bedding?
It's the practice of arranging brightly colored flowers in rigid geometric patterns so the garden looks like a carpet or wallpaper. He thinks it's an absolute abomination. He vastly prefers the fence of sheep walks, the wild old English garden, the natural chaos of things growing exactly where they want to grow.
There is a specific anecdote in this environmental section that really stuck with me. He talks about sandwich papers.
Ah, yes. He is complaining about visiting public parks, specifically Hampton Court, and seeing the grass covered in greasy sandwich papers left behind by the London crowds.
It's such a modern complaint. Just litter in the park.
But listen to his deep analysis of it. He doesn't just say, oh, people are messy and rude. He says this litter is a tragic sign that the population has completely lost its self-respect.
How does litter equal a lack of self-respect?
He argues they don't love the earth because their own daily lives are so miserable and so ugly that they literally cannot imagine the earth being beautiful. They treat the public park exactly like they treat their own squalid, smog-filled streets.
So even the litter on the grass is a symptom of the century of commerce.
Everything is connected from Morris. You cannot have a clean, beautiful park if you have dirty, soul-crushing factories. You can't have beautiful public behavior if you have degrading private labor.
Man, this reverence for the real and the natural leads him to a very controversial stance on architecture, which is part 5 of our deep dive, preservation versus restoration.
This is the anti-scrape philosophy. Morris was actually a founding member of the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings. Now, in his time, it was very, very popular to restore old medieval churches.
Which, to a modern ear, sounds good, right? Fix them up, save them from crumbling.
To us, maybe. But to the Victorians, restore often meant scrape off all the historical texture and make it look like we think it looked back in the 13th century. They would aggressively tear out later editions, smooth over the beautifully weathered stone, and make it look perfect and brand new again.
And Morris hated this with a passion.
He called it a forgery. He argued that the weathering, the chips, the strange architectural alterations made over centuries, that is the history. If you scrape it off just to make it look new, you are actively destroying the soul of the building. You're turning a living monument into a dead model.
He talks about specific buildings that were ruined this way, doesn't he?
He does. He mentions St. Mark's in Venice, Magdalen Bridge in Oxford, and the ghost of Westminster Abbey. He says Westminster Abbey has been insulted by the pompous undertaker's lies of restoration.
Pompous undertaker's lies. The man had an unbelievable way with words.
He truly did. He believed we are just temporary custodians of these spaces. We should keep the roof watertight. We should prop up the wall if it's literally falling down, but otherwise, leave it alone. Let it be old. Let the deep history speak for itself.
So, looking at all of this, the philosophy of labor, the attack on luxury, the environmentalism, the architecture, what is the lasting legacy here? Why are we doing a deep dive into this text in 2026? Let's move to part 6.
The influence of this text is massive and completely embedded in our culture. First, obviously, there's the arts and crafts movement. How this specific text laid the intellectual groundwork for the total rejection of mass production in favor of hand craftsmanship.
You see that everywhere today in the maker movement. People desperately wanting handmade pottery, craft beer, bespoke wooden furniture.
Exactly. Then there's the direct connection to modern minimalism. His golden rule, have nothing useless or ugly, is basically the great-grandfather of modern design ethics. Form follows function.
And ethical consumerism.
This is the big one. Morris forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. Was the man who made this happy? That is the central beating heart of the fair trade movement. When you buy a cheap, fast fashion shirt, Morris is the ghost in your head asking about the sweatshop. He's the one irrevocably linking the low price tag to the degrading labor.
And finally, environmentalism. He saw, way before almost anyone else, that industrial success shouldn't cost the fairness of the earth.
He realized early on that if you destroy the natural beauty of the world just to make money, you are essentially eating your own tail. It's a dead end.
It is an incredibly powerful, comprehensive worldview. But part of what we do here is push these ideas to their absolute breaking point. So it is time for our thought experiments.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Now, a quick disclaimer for you listening. These are hypothetical scenarios for entertainment and educational purposes only, designed strictly to test the author's philosophical framework. We are not endorsing these as actual public policy.
Right, just a stress test of the ideas.
Okay, experiment number 1, the unhappy labor embargo.
All right, lay it on me.
Imagine a society that actually implements a joy certification for all products. It becomes totally illegal to sell any object, furniture, clothing, technology, unless the maker signs a sworn affidavit that they genuinely enjoyed making it.
A joy affidavit. I confirm that I was spiritually fulfilled while welding this Honda Civic bumper.
Exactly. And not just the CEO at the top. Every single person on the assembly line, the person stitching the sneaker, the person soldering the microchip in the iPhone. If one person says, "This was toil, I hated it," the product is banned from the market.
Well, applying Morris's framework strictly, the immediate result is that the global economy collapses instantly. 90%, maybe 99% of modern commerce just vanishes overnight. Morris would proudly call this the end of mechanical toil.
Right. So no cheap clothes, no mass-produced electronics, no plastic knickknacks at the dollar store.
The rubbish disappears. The entire sham art industry vanishes in a puff of smoke.
But what happens to us, the consumers?
Prices skyrocket to unimaginable levels. You don't own 30 shirts anymore, you own 3. But theoretically, under Morris's rules, those 3 shirts are beautiful. They represent imaginative work. They will last for 20 years.
But think about the transition period. Would we actually be happier? Or would the sudden lack of convenience drive us to revolt?
Morris would argue we would absolutely be happier in the long run. He firmly believes the convenience we cling to is a trap. He thinks we are currently slaves to our possessions. In this joy certification scenario, our houses are suddenly empty, but our lives are full. However, the chaos of the transition, you're talking about dismantling the entire structure of global capitalism.
It effectively forces us backward into a village economy. If I need a dining table, I have to go find a guy in my town who actually likes making tables.
And if a guy's in a bad mood that week, you just don't get a table.
Sorry, not feeling the joy today. Come back next month.
It's funny, but it highlights just how much our current comfort relies entirely on unhappy labor. We assume infinite availability. Morris says that assumption is fundamentally immoral.
That is a tough pill to swallow. Okay, experiment number 2. The public eye property law.
Okay.
This one is based on the text's argument that architecture is the consideration of the whole external surroundings of the life of man.
Meaning the earth belongs to everyone, visually speaking.
Exactly. So here's the new zoning law. You legally own the inside of your house. You can do whatever you want in there. But the outside, the facade, the yard, the roof belongs to the public.
Interesting.
You cannot build, paint, or modify your exterior without the unanimous approval of a jury of passersby. And their only criteria for approval is, does this addition add to the fairness of the earth?
This is effectively an extreme homeowners association, but run by every random person in the town.
Morris would love this, right? He argues that destroying a nice view or cutting down a beautiful tree is a literal crime against your neighbors.
He would definitely support the core principle. He believes private property rights shouldn't allow you to inflict your bad taste or ugliness on the public sphere. But the implication of this law...
What's the implication?
Total stagnation. Think about it. Morris loved the old. He loved the Gothic style. He violently hated the new red brick buildings of his day. If you have a jury of the general public, they're almost always likely to vote for what is safe and familiar.
So we might finally end the Cockney nightmare of identical suburban sprawl.
We might. Or we might end up in a tyrannical aesthetic stagnation where absolutely nothing new can ever be built because new often looks ugly to the old generation.
And we have to remember the cockroach color ban from the text.
Oh yes, the brownish red paint the text specifically detests. Under this public eye law, painting your front door that cockroach color is literally a crime.
It really raises the question, who gets to define beauty? Morris was very, very confident that he knew what was beautiful and what was sham. But do we trust the average passersby to make that call?
That's the rub. Morris genuinely believed that if people were truly free from degrading toil, they would naturally have good taste. That beauty is the natural default state of free men. That is the optimistic beating core of his entire philosophy.
And that brings us to our final synthesis. Let's recap the one-sentence thesis of hopes and fears for art.
We must refuse to accept a civilization where the few are refined, The many are degraded, and the earth is made ugly by the hurry of life.
The text ultimately demands discontent.
It does. He says we should be Gideon's band, refusing to settle for the status quo. We should be actively angry about the ugliness around us.
And he ends the book with a provocative, almost scary thought.
He suggests that if art cannot be shared by all, it is better for art to die entirely.
Better no art at all than unfair art.
He says, I would that the world should indeed sweep away all art for a while, rather than the wheat should rot in the miser's granary. I would that the earth had it, that it might yet have a chance to quicken in the dark.
He's saying, let it die, let it decompose in the darkness of the earth, so something new and real can be reborn later.
And the question he leaves us with is, are we currently in that darkness? Or are we keeping a sham art on life support that actively prevents the new birth?
That is something for you to mull over or explore on your own. Next time you buy something, ask yourself, was the maker happy?
Indeed.
Thank you for listening to Talk Treatises.